Clara observed the modest landscape of the house where she grew up, feeling trapped by the weight of so many uncertainties. In recent months, after his father's death, reality had become increasingly bleak. In the midst of these reflections, a firm knock on the door broke the silence, and his life changed forever. Upon opening the door, Clara was faced with an elegant man, wearing an impeccable suit and an impenetrable expression. He handed her an envelope, and his words were like a blow. "You will need to marry Vicente Montenegro to pay off your father's debt." The statement echoed in his mind, meaningless, like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. She hesitated before opening the envelope, as if she feared the contents would be worse than the lawyer's cold words. Clara's trembling hands slid over the paper, and each line she read seemed to weigh tons. Marriage to a man she had never met? Vicente Montenegro was a household name, a reclusive millionaire, shrouded in mystery and rumors that suggested a ruthless temperament. Indignation and despair mingled in his chest. The possibility of a life alongside a dark stranger was terrifying, but there was no escape. Clara felt trapped, and the lump in her throat only grew. She looked up at the lawyer, looking for answers, but he just kept his gaze serious and distant, as if nothing was shaking him. "It's a fair deal. Your father incurred a debt to Vicente Montenegro and, as heir, you are responsible for paying it off." His voice seemed like an echo of an inescapable sentence, cold and irrevocable. Clara knew that her only way out to avoid losing her family's inheritance and legacy was to submit to this marriage, even if it meant giving up her freedom. Every word resonated in his heart like torture. During the days that followed, Clara felt like a prisoner awaiting the moment of execution. His friends and neighbors commented, all with a look of pity or contempt. "Did you hear that Clara is going to marry Montenegro?" some murmured. At the same time, Clara tried to stay strong, looking for a way out that might not exist. However, the pressure of avoiding her family's ruin crushed her like an overwhelming tide, carrying her towards a fate of no return. How could she say goodbye to herself and accept the role of wife to an unknown man? Even with her heart heavy, Clara knew she needed to make a decision, and quickly. In her mind, she imagined Vicente Montenegro as a cold man, someone who would only use her for his interests and then discard her without remorse. Every new thought about him only increased the feeling of helplessness. The lawyer's words resonated in her mind like a verdict she couldn't escape. Dejected, Clara slowly walked to the small room where she had spent so many moments of her life. He closed the door, trying to calm his mind, but the tears finally fell. However, she understood that her choice had already been made by destiny, long before she reached the point she was at. Every time she closed her eyes, images of her childhood, of her father's house, of the warm smiles of happy moments appeared, and the thought of losing them all left her powerless. Determined to honor her father's sacrifice, Clara took the document and signed it with trembling hands, sealing an agreement with her own life. When closing the envelope, she realized that this was her first step towards a path of no return. The lawyer picked up the document emotionlessly, only muttering, "The ceremony will be arranged quickly. Prepare yourself." And with a formal wave, he withdrew, leaving Clara in an unsettling void. The loneliness that followed made her realize the real weight of her decision, feeling like she was running out of air. In front of a window, Clara contemplated the horizon with wet and fearful eyes, as if she could already see Vicente Montenegro on the other side, waiting for her. Vicente Montenegro was a man few people really knew. In the business world, he was feared and respected, with a reputation that crossed borders. His empire built from nothing showed the determination and toughness that Vicente applied in all areas of his life. But what no one knew was what made him this way. The loss of someone who had been the center of his world. The serene but distant face he showed to everyone hid an old pain, a wound that had never healed. And perhaps it was that same pain that made him now consider a marriage of convenience. Looking at the photo on his desk, Vicente let himself get lost for a moment, remembering the past. The image was of his late wife, a woman whose love and betrayal had taught him never to truly trust again. Since then, he had closed himself off from the world and emotions. Everything he did now was in the name of control, of keeping the reins of his own life. For him, Clara was just another piece in his intricate game of power. She would pay for the debt left by her father, and he would control her without ever allowing her to see beyond his cold mask. Marriage was, for Vicente, an opportunity to reaffirm his power, to make it clear that the name Montenegro would never be associated with failures or debts. And Clara, with all her simplicity and fragile appearance, would be the perfect symbol for this control. When he heard that she had finally signed the contract, He showed no emotion. He knew she probably hated him, but that was irrelevant. For Vicente, emotions were signs of weakness, something he had abandoned along with his past love. Still, a small spark of curiosity bothered him. On the day of their first meeting, Vicente waited for Clara in his immense living room, surrounded by relics and pieces of art, symbolizing the refined taste and fortune that he cared so much about. When she entered, her frightened expression made him smile, albeit without emotion. "So you're the girl who accepted my proposal," he said, with slight sarcasm. Clara looked back at him, without lowering her head, surprised to find a man with a coldness that seemed to cut the air around him. Vicente noticed her determination and, internally, admired her courage, but he would never show it. During the meeting, the tension was palpable. Clara tried to stand her ground, but Vicente's presence intimidated her. He was a tall man, with rigid features, dark eyes and an impassive expression that seemed to decipher everything around him. Vicente analyzed her every move, as if he could predict her thoughts. The atmosphere was charged with mutual distrust. Clara knew he only saw her as a convenient solution, and that hurt her. Vicente, in turn, considered it just a means of fulfilling his purposes. For him, everything needed to be under his control, and Clara would be no exception. But even beneath the ice of his calculated appearance, Vicente felt slightly disturbed. Clara was not as he had imagined. Instead of submissive and fearful, there was a touch of dignity in her posture. This aura of determination bothered him, as Vicente preferred people who submitted without question. However, there was one thing he could not allow: a breaking of his rules. "We will get married and you will be Mrs. Montenegro," he said, his voice thick with authority. "But there are conditions, and you will need to follow them without question. My world does not allow for failure." The church was decorated with a sophistication that contrasted sharply with Clara's feelings. There were white flowers, sparkling chandeliers, and a solemn silence that only added to the weight of the moment. Clara walked down the hallway, her heart racing, as if each step took her to a dark and unknown destination. She felt the gazes of the few guests present, almost all of them powerful and distant figures, associates of Vicente. Clara was the only person outside that world, and her nervousness almost made her tremble. She looked for a spark of courage, trying to keep her head up and her gaze steady. At the altar, Vicente waited with his usual unchanging expression. His gaze, cold and distant, did not reveal any feelings. For him, that marriage was just an agreement, a transaction that brought benefits. Watching Clara approach, he analyzed every detail of her, like a businessman examining a new acquisition. She looked different from the women he had met, without extravagant jewelry or designer clothes. Clara exuded a simplicity that contrasted with her luxurious surroundings. But Vicente did not allow any admiration to emerge. For him, Clara was just part of the plan. Upon reaching the altar, Clara felt a feeling of deep emptiness. She was there, ready to say yes to a man she didn't know and who didn't love her either. When the priest began the ceremony, the words sounded distant, almost like a hushed whisper. She looked at Vicente, trying to decipher if there was something more under that impenetrable gaze. But all she saw was an insurmountable barrier, an invisible wall that prevented her from seeing any trace of emotion. Vicente answered the priest's questions with an automatic firmness, as if it were all nothing more than protocol. When it was her turn to respond, Clara felt her heart falter, a part of her screaming to run away. But the memory of her father's debt and the sacrifice he had made for her compelled her to move on. With a whisper she replied yes, sealing her fate. Vicente, in turn, watched her without blinking, as if her every movement was a reflection of his own decision. He felt satisfied. His plan was unfolding as expected. There was no room for error, and Clara was now officially part of his world, subject to his rules and control. At the end of the ceremony, Vicente held Clara's hand to seal the marriage with a brief and formal kiss. The touch of his lips was cold, distant, and Clara felt the absence of affection like a stab. At that moment, the loneliness seemed greater than ever. Even surrounded by people, she felt isolated, trapped in a loveless union, where her dreams and desires had been subjugated. Vicente, in turn, remained impassive, with his gaze fixed on the altar, as if the weight of that commitment was something trivial. Upon leaving the church, Clara and Vicente were greeted by camera flashes and discreet murmurs. The Montenegro wedding was in the news, and Clara's presence at Vicente's side surprised everyone. With a calculated smile, Vicente guided her to the car, where she sat in silence, feeling the discomfort and tension build. On the way to reception, she looked out the window, trying to mentally distance herself from the man next to her. Vicente, however, maintained a rigid posture, his gaze fixed ahead, as if Clara were just a passenger on his journey. During the reception, Clara tried hard to hide her anguish, smiling politely at people she didn't even know. Every word she exchanged, every gesture, seemed like rehearsed theater, an attempt to survive that world that was slowly swallowing her. Vicente spoke to the guests with calculated friendliness, showing everyone that he maintained control over every aspect of his life, including his marriage. However, whenever he looked at Clara, his face became more rigid, as if she were a constant reminder of something he wanted to forget. The night progressed, and when they were finally alone in the hotel room where they would spend the night, the silence between them was almost unbearable. Clara stared at the ground, trying to shake off her fear and insecurity. Vicente, without any delicacy, simply murmured, "I hope you understand that, from today onwards, our lives are intertwined by circumstances, not by choice." He made it clear that there would be no room for romance or complicity. Clara felt a tightness in her chest, knowing that, at that moment, her hope for something more had been extinguished once and for all. The following morning brought with it an even more acute coldness between Clara and Vicente. The sun illuminated the room with an almost uncomfortable light, but Clara felt trapped in a dark space. Vicente had left early, leaving only a brief message in a note next to the bed. "We have commitments later. Be ready." The words sounded like orders, reinforcing that she was now just a cog in his calculated routine. Feeling empty, Clara remained there, with her mind wandering between the longing for her simple life and the weight of new responsibilities. Vicente's house, a vast mansion full of luxury, seemed to Clara like a labyrinth where she would never be able to find herself. The employees treated her with a distant formality, and the absence of any human welcome made the environment more oppressive. In each corridor, in each room, Clara felt even more out of place, as if her presence there was a mistake that everyone tolerated out of obligation. Throughout the day, she tried to explore the house, but the impersonal looks and profound silence made her return to her room, where she took refuge, seeking some peace. When Vicente returned that night, he seemed oblivious to the impact his absence and coldness had. Clara was sitting in the living room, trying to occupy herself with a book, but looked up when she heard him enter. He walked right by, as if she were part of the furniture, without even greeting her. It was as if, for him, this marriage was just a bureaucratic formality. She wanted to confront him, ask him what he really expected of her, but she knew that any attempt to get closer would be rejected. Vicente made it clear with every gesture that she should not interfere in his life. In the days that followed, Clara felt increasingly invisible. The only communication between the two occurred at silent dinners, where words were rare and eye contact was avoided. She watched Vicente with curiosity and a hint of sadness, trying to understand what made him so unshakable. His silence was like an insurmountable wall, a barrier that Clara didn't know if she wanted or could cross. Vicente, in turn, remained faithful to what he promised. He did not allow the relationship to go beyond the minimum necessary to maintain appearances. However, Clara began to notice some peculiarities that revealed Vicente's hidden humanity. He spent hours in his office, surrounded by documents and contracts, but occasionally his gaze would get lost, as if something was troubling him. One night, Clara saw him sitting, holding a framed photo in his hands, an elegant and sweet-looking woman. Vicente's face softened for a brief moment, but as soon as he noticed Clara's presence, he closed down again, putting the photo aside with a stiff expression. That scene awakened an unexpected curiosity in Clara. Who was that woman, and why did Vicente hold that memory with such reverence? Although he wanted to ask, he knew it would be useless. Vicente would never open up to her. Still, the image of his lost gaze that night remained in her mind, planting a small seed of empathy she hadn't expected to feel. Perhaps behind all that coldness, there was a pain that Vicente rigorously hid, and Clara felt inexplicably compelled to find out more about the man she was forced to marry. The days continued to pass, and Clara tried to establish a routine that brought her some comfort. He used to spend time in the home library, reading or writing in a diary where he recorded his thoughts and emotions. Loneliness and silence were constant companions, but the feeling of emptiness intensified each time Vicente ignored their presence. As much as she tried to accept her new life, Clara still longed for something more. A gesture of friendship, a glimpse of affection. She knew these feelings were foolish, but she couldn't stop herself from wanting them. That night, Clara wrote in her diary, letting her emotions overflow. I feel like a ghost in this house, without a voice, without a presence. Vicente is like a shadow that barely notices me, and every day that passes it seems like I'm disappearing a little more. As he wrote, silent tears ran down his face, marking the pages with the anguish he held in his heart. She felt helpless, and the promise of a life without love seemed to become more and more real. Clara decided that she could not continue living as a shadow in her own life. He made the decision to try a different approach, to break the ice that Vicente had imposed between them. That night, as he ate dinner in silence, she dared to start a conversation. Vicente, I wanted to know more about your life. About your family, your past. She expected some reaction, perhaps a flicker of discomfort or interest. However, Vicente didn't even look up from his plate, responding in a dry and distant tone. Some things don't need to be discussed. That cold response could have discouraged Clara, but on the contrary, it ignited an impulse of persistence. She understood that there was something hidden behind that facade, a past that he kept under lock and key. Thus, throughout the days that followed, Clara remained determined to find out more about Vicente, even if it was in a subtle way. She began to notice small details, his schedule, his routines, and the way he always carried a specific book that he never let anyone touch. Clara knew that understanding Vicente would be a long road, but something in her refused to give up. One night, when passing by the library, Clara noticed that Vicente was there, focused on the book that always accompanied him. Without noticing her presence, he leafed through the pages with an expression that mixed longing and anguish. Clara's instinct was to get closer and in a low voice, she ventured a question. Who is she? Vicente closed the book abruptly and looked at Clara with a penetrating look, clearly irritated. You have no right to ask questions about my life, he said, in a harsher tone of voice than usual. But, at that moment, Clara realized that she had touched a deep wound. After the confrontation, Clara returned to her room with her heart racing and a feeling of regret. She didn't want to cause more tension, but she knew she couldn't completely shake off the desire to understand the man beside her. That night, thoughts about Vicente's past life kept her awake. Questions invaded her mind, and the mystery he carried became, for her, an irresistible enigma. He knew that something had marked his soul irreversibly, something that had transformed him into the cold man he knew today. In the days that followed, Clara remained more distant, respecting the invisible barrier between them, but her presence and calm looks continued to bother Vicente. He realized that Clara was different, that she didn't fear him, but she also didn't submit completely. She watched him with an almost palpable empathy, which disconcerted him. Used to superficial relationships, Vicente didn't know how to deal with the way Clara tried to approach him without judging him, offering a type of understanding that he neither expected nor desired. Then, one rainy afternoon, while the two were stuck inside the house, Clara found herself once again trying to break the silence. She prepared some tea and, with a gentleness that surprised them both, brought a cup to Vicente, who was reading in his office. Without saying anything, he left the cup on the table and prepared to leave. But to her surprise, Vicente stopped her, holding her arm with a light, hesitant touch. For an instant, his gaze softened, and it seemed as if the words were about to escape. There are things that time cannot erase. Scars that become part of us, he murmured, in an unexpectedly vulnerable tone. The brief contact they had left a deep mark on Clara. Although Vicente continued to act reserved, that moment of vulnerability encouraged her to delve deeper into the mystery that surrounded him. Clara began to discreetly investigate, asking the house's oldest employees about details of Vicente's past. After much resistance, one of the most loyal employees finally told her a story that brought painful insight into the man who was now her husband. Clara discovered that Vicente had once been a warmer and, in a way, even romantic man. There was a woman in his past, a woman he had been in love with and planned a life with. However, in a tragic car accident, she lost her life, leaving Vicente devastated. Since then, he had built a wall around himself, emotionally isolating himself from everyone, and had sworn to never allow himself to love again. He had come to see marriage as just a convenient transaction, an affectionless partnership that would allow him to continue his life without involving his heart. Upon hearing this, Clara felt immense sadness and better understood the weight that Vicente was carrying. She now saw that his cold, distant behavior was a form of self-protection, a way of avoiding the pain of losing someone she loved again. This discovery shook her in an unexpected way, and the distance that had previously hurt her now seemed less personal, as it was as if, in a way, he was imprisoned in a cell that he had created himself. Clara felt a deep desire to help him find some peace, even if he could never love her the way he loved that woman. The following days were marked by small gestures from Clara to soften the atmosphere between the two. She prepared dishes that she knew Vicente liked, left thank you notes for simple things, and made an effort to make life easier. Gradually, he seemed more receptive to these gestures, although he never commented on them directly. There were moments when Clara noticed that he was watching her differently, almost as if he was allowing her to get closer in a way that no one else had been able to. One night, after a peaceful dinner without the usual tensions, Vicente surprised Clara by suggesting that she accompany him on a walk through the mansion's gardens. The invitation made her anxious, but she accepted without hesitation, feeling that this was a significant step for both of them. They walked in silence under the light of the stars, and Clara took the moment to admire him without the usual resistance. Vicente, in turn, seemed relaxed, as if allowing himself, for a few moments, to let his defenses lower. During the walk, Vicente finally shared a little of his pain, something Clara had never imagined he would do. "She was my life, Clara. And when I lost her, it was like part of me disappeared too. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back to being the man I was." The words were filled with melancholy, and Clara felt a lump in her throat. She held his hand lightly, without saying anything, just letting his touch convey her understanding. Vicente did not move his hand away, allowing that contact to last for a few seconds. That night, Clara went to bed with a heavy heart, but also with renewed hope. "I knew I couldn't replace the woman Vicente had loved, nor erase the suffering he carried. But deep down, she wished that, little by little, he could see in her someone he could trust and perhaps find some kind of comfort." She understood that the journey would be long and that Vicente was not an easy man to win over, but she was willing to keep trying, because, in that brief moment when they held hands, she felt that they were both beginning to come out of their emotional prisons, even though that hesitantly and uncertainly. The next morning, Clara woke up with a feeling of lightness that she hadn't felt in a long time. The walk in the garden with Vicente, and that brief moment when he opened up, brought her unexpected hope. Maybe little by little, she could help him find some peace. Sitting at the breakfast table, Clara noticed that Vicente was more calm, although he kept his expression controlled. It was subtle progress, but she was already content with small advances, as she knew that any attempt to change with him would need to be done with patience and delicacy. Determined to stay close, Clara suggested that they spend the weekend at the family's country house, located in a remote region, surrounded by mountains and forests. She knew that work was the anchor that kept Vicente tied to his cold and mechanical lifestyle, so the idea of moving away from his usual environment could perhaps bring him some relief. To her surprise, Vicente accepted the suggestion, although without much enthusiasm, as if he was just giving in to please her. Clara, however, took this as a good sign and tried to prepare everything with dedication. The journey to the country house was marked by comfortable silence. The green landscape passed by the window, and Clara allowed herself to admire the tranquility of the countryside, so different from the formal and solitary environment of the mansion. When they arrived, Vicente showed a little more interest, and she noticed that the country house seemed to bring back some pleasant memories for him, even if he didn't verbalize them. Clara explored the house with joy, seeing an opportunity to create new memories for both of them in that welcoming space, far from the city. That night, Clara prepared a simple but delicious meal and set the table by candlelight, creating a more intimate and relaxed atmosphere. Vicente observed everything in silence, but Clara felt that he was more accessible, allowing herself to relax in the warm environment she was trying to build. They had dinner in a peaceful atmosphere, and for the first time, Vicente praised her for dinner, albeit briefly. Clara smiled, feeling that that gesture, however discreet it was, meant a lot from him. It was a sign that perhaps he was beginning to value her presence. After dinner, they decided to walk around the house again, and Vicente, more at ease, began to talk about his childhood, something he had never shared before. Clara listened attentively, noticing the lightness that appeared in her voice as she recalled the happy moments she had lived there, with her parents and siblings. It was as if, by revisiting these memories, he was recovering a part of himself that, until then, had remained dormant. The discreet smile that escaped her in one of the stories warmed Clara's heart, who began to nourish a genuine admiration for the complex and marked man that Vicente was. On the last night at the cottage, an unexpected storm caused the power to go out. Darkness filled the room, and Clara, without thinking, sought refuge in Vicente's embrace. He hesitated for a brief moment, but, in an almost instinctive movement, he wrapped his arms around her. At that moment, the proximity made Clara realize how strong and vulnerable he was, at the same time. Vicente also seemed surprised by the comfort that hug gave him, and for a few minutes, they remained together in silence, as if they both found peace in each other's company. When they finally pulled away, Vicente looked at her with a look of mixed confusion and something else, as if he was fighting feelings he didn't want to admit. Clara, on the other hand, felt that something had changed. That night marked a new phase between them, and the bond that was beginning to form brought a new meaning to the relationship. Although they both knew that the path would be full of uncertainties, Clara was willing to face the challenges that came, with the hope that one day, Vicente would be able to see in her not just a companion imposed by destiny, but someone he could truly love. When they returned to the city, the mood between them was lighter. Vicente seemed more attentive, and Clara felt that, little by little, she was no longer a stranger in her own life. Days after returning to the mansion, the routine returned to its usual rhythm, but Clara felt that something had changed between her and Vicente. The cold, distant environment that once defined their marriage now felt less solid, as if every conversation, no matter how small, was chipping away at the invisible wall between them. Clara felt that she was getting closer to Vicente and, to her surprise, he seemed willing to allow this approach. However, this apparent stability was about to be shaken by an unexpected revelation. One spring afternoon, while Clara was organizing some old documents, she found a photograph that caught her attention in a breathtaking way. It was an image of Vicente and the woman he had loved in the past, the same woman who, according to the employees, had left a permanent scar on his soul. The young woman smiled next to Vicente, who appeared to be a much lighter and more cheerful man. That glimpse of a happier Vicente moved her, but what really disturbed her was something she never imagined. The woman in the photo looked surprisingly like her. Clara stood still, her heart racing and her mind confused. That similarity couldn't be a coincidence. Was it possible that Vicente's choice for marriage was not a simple matter of convenience, as he had claimed? Could it be that, deep down, he had chosen her exactly because of this resemblance? Suspicion settled like a weight on her heart, and at the same time, a wave of insecurity and discomfort washed over her. Doubts consumed her, and she didn't know if she wanted to confront him about what she had just discovered. In the following days, Clara's restlessness became noticeable, and Vicente soon noticed her change in mood. Trying to understand what was bothering her, he called her for a talk, but Clara was hesitant. She didn't want to hurt him or accuse him of something that, perhaps, was just an illusion of his disturbed mind. But, at the same time, she needed answers to alleviate the whirlwind of feelings that dominated her. With a heavy sigh, she decided that she needed to confront him with the truth and asked, in a trembling voice, "Vicente, did you marry me because I reminded you of someone from your past?" The question took him by surprise. Vicente looked away, clearly disconcerted. For a few moments, silence was the only answer, which only increased Clara's despair. When he finally spoke, Vicente revealed, in a sincere tone, that yes, she looked a lot like the woman he had lost. But, in a voice full of regret, he added that, contrary to what Clara thought, his choice was not just based on appearance. "I was looking for someone who could fill the void. But I didn't expect to feel like this, so confused," he confessed, visibly shaken. His words left Clara in a mix of feelings. Part of her understood that the emptiness Vicente carried was greater than any gesture of affection she could offer. However, another part felt a pang of resentment, because she wanted to be loved for who she really was and not because she was a memory of the past. It was painful to realize that, even with all the attempts to get closer, she was still, for him, a shadow of someone who no longer existed. Clara left the office with tears contained, determined to distance herself emotionally, even if she needed to live by his side. Vicente, on the other hand, seemed absorbed in his own thoughts, as if, for the first time, he was recognizing how much the marks of the past still controlled him. The tension between them increased, and the atmosphere that had once been one of growing trust now became cold and distant again. Vicente wondered whether he should insist on the relationship or let her go so she could find someone who could truly value her. That night, Clara slept in the guest room for the first time. She was determined to protect her own heart, as she knew that the situation would not allow her to find happiness as long as she was just a substitute. She knew that the decision to walk away was the best way to maintain her dignity and perhaps let Vicente realize what he was about to lose. Even without knowing what the future held for them, Clara understood that she needed to be strong, even if it meant a definitive break in her life with Vicente. The days that followed were filled with palpable tension. Vicente tried to understand the whirlwind of feelings that Clara had caused him, but memories of the past were more present than ever. The emptiness that he had previously been unable to recognize now became a deafening echo, and with each passing day, his internal struggle intensified. Clara, in turn, chose to distance herself emotionally, feeling lost between the love she began to feel for him and the pain of constant comparison with the woman who had left. The physical separation in their guest house was a small consolation, but it was not enough to erase the anguish that Vicente's words left in her heart. One day, while walking through the park near the mansion, Clara encountered a group of women at a community event. They were preparing for a theater performance and, without thinking twice, Clara offered to help. What started as a simple act of distraction quickly turned into therapy for her. Engaging with new people and sharing stories, laughter, and even tears helped her reclaim a piece of herself that she feared she had lost. At each rehearsal, Clara allowed herself to have fun, laugh and feel the joy of living without the weight of expectations that Vicente imposed on her. Meanwhile, Vicente was increasingly immersed in his pain and loneliness. Clara's absence from his everyday life had become such a profound void that he began to realize how much he needed her. The weeks passed, and he tried to contact her several times, but Clara's response was always the same, a distant cordiality that left him distressed. In his mind, Vicente knew it was time to face his demons, to confront the pain of the past and try to free himself from it, not just for himself, but for Clara. The decision to look for her consumed him, but he didn't know how to do it without exposing his vulnerability. One night, Vicente decided it was time to take action. He put on a shirt he used to wear when he was with Clara and went to the guest house. The soft light emanating from her room attracted him like a magnet. He hesitated at the door, taking a deep breath before knocking lightly. Clara, surprised, opened the door and was speechless when she saw Vicente standing in front of her, an expression of determination on his face. He didn't look like the same man who had walked away. There was a new light in his eyes, as if he was finally willing to face what was inside him. "We can talk?" Vicente asked, his voice shaky but firm. Clara hesitated, but realized she couldn't continue avoiding this conversation. She nodded and let him in. The tension in the air was palpable, and they both knew that this could be a defining moment for both of them. Vicente began, explaining how he had felt lost without her, how her absence had revealed the true abyss that existed in his heart. He also admitted that comparing her to the woman from his past made him realize that Clara was unique, and that it wasn't fair to her that he was still stuck with those memories. "I don't want you to be an echo of what I lost. I want you to be you," Vicente declared, his voice full of emotion. Tears began to stream down Clara's face, and she finally felt seen. "Vicente, I want to be who you need, but I can't be a substitute. I am a person with my own dreams and fears, and I need to know that you see me like that," she replied, her voice breaking. Vicente, listening to her words, realized the truth they carried. He finally understood that he couldn't continue carrying the weight of the past if he wanted to give Clara the love she deserved. "I can't promise it will be easy, but I'm willing to fight for us," he said, holding out his hand. Clara hesitated for a moment, but then took his hand. The touch brought instant relief, as if the connection between them could heal the wounds they both carried. The conversation continued until dawn, with both sharing their hopes, fears and, most importantly, the desire to build something new together. Vicente did not promise that the memories of the past would disappear, but he committed to being honest with Clara about his pain, while she promised to be patient while he allowed himself to feel. They knew that the journey would not be easy, but that open dialogue was the first stone in the construction of a new path, a path that began to move away from the shadow of the past. At the dawn of that day, a new understanding enveloped them. Vicente and Clara, now more united, were ready to face the challenges that the future held for them. With a new chapter in their lives, they both began to believe that love could blossom, even in the most complicated circumstances. With morning emerging into a clear blue sky, Vicente and Clara sat down for breakfast feeling renewed. There was a comfort in each other's presence, a palpable energy that encouraged them to move forward. The atmosphere was light, and for the first time in a long time, they both laughed together, as if the weight they were carrying had lifted, even if just a little. Clara prepared a simple breakfast, but for her it had a special taste. Each bite was a symbol of the new phase they were beginning. During the meal, Vicente proposed an idea that had occurred to him during the previous night's conversation. He suggested they spend time together, exploring not only the city but also the interests they each had. Clara was excited about the proposal, feeling that it could help them rediscover themselves. Furthermore, it would be an opportunity for Vicente to learn to enjoy life in a way that did not involve his old lonely and stressful routine. The first activity of the day would be a visit to the park where Clara had gotten involved with the theater group. When they arrived, the atmosphere was vibrant and full of life. The event was in full swing, with artists rehearsing, children playing and music echoing in the background. Clara introduced Vicente to some friends, and the interaction between them flowed naturally. Vicente, although initially shy, soon got carried away by the spirit of the event, laughing and sharing stories that amused everyone. As they watched the rehearsals, Clara began to notice how Vicente was transforming before her eyes. With each laugh, each interaction, he seemed lighter, closer to her. That version of him, distant and melancholic, began to dissipate. Clara also felt more alive. The feeling of being by his side, not as a burden, but as a partner, pushed her to open up even more. She was rediscovering joy in her own life, a joy that had been clouded by insecurities and doubts. After a few hours of fun and learning, Clara and Vicente sat on a bench in the shade of a leafy tree, where they could observe the movement around them. Vicente, with a calm smile, said, "You know, I don't remember the last time I felt so normal." Clara laughed and replied, "It's amazing how simple moments can make us feel alive again." This simple dialogue led Vicente to reflect on the importance of small moments, and how they often go unnoticed amid the chaos of life. The day unfolded amid laughter and conversations, but what brought them together most was an unexpected moment. A theater performance began to take place, and Clara, encouraged by Vicente, decided to join the group. She took the stage, feeling a mix of nervousness and adrenaline. When performing, she felt the energy of the audience and, more importantly, the presence of Vicente in the audience, who watched her with a sparkle in his eyes. At the end of her performance, the applause echoed, and Clara felt reinvigorated, as if she were rediscovering herself. After the show, Vicente found her backstage, full of pride and enthusiasm. "You were amazing. I've never seen you shine so bright," he exclaimed, wrapping her in a tight hug. Clara smiled, feeling that this moment of support meant more than words could express. It was the validation she needed, and for a moment, the barriers that had existed between them seemed to disappear. However, as the joy of the day enveloped them both, Clara couldn't help but wonder about the future. Even with all the progress they were making, there was a shadow of uncertainty about how they would continue to connect. Vicente seemed so willing to face his past, but what if the memories came back to haunt him? Would it be possible for him to let go once and for all? The questions followed her as night fell and they returned to the mansion. Vicente noticed Clara's thoughtful expression and decided it was time to address the subject. "Clara, what are you thinking?" he asked, his voice soft and understanding. Clara hesitated, but the honesty they had built over the last few weeks encouraged her to be frank. I'm a little worried. What will happen when you remember everything again? What if the memories become too heavy?" Vicente looked at her with sincerity in his eyes. "I can't promise I won't have difficulties, but what I feel for you is real, and it gives me strength. I'm willing to fight, Clara, and you don't have to face this alone." His words brought relief to her heart. There was something powerful in the idea that they were both willing to fight together, that they could face the storms of the past side by side. That conversation sealed a silent pact between the two. They were not alone in their battles. They could support and encourage each other no matter what the future held. As they climbed the stairs of the mansion, Clara felt that, finally, she had found a path to hope, a path that, although uncertain, promised a better tomorrow. After that conversation, something in Clara changed. There was a sparkle in her eyes that was not only a reflection of the love she was beginning to feel, but also of her renewed confidence in herself. The uncertainty and insecurity that previously haunted her seemed to have given way to a strength that even she didn't know she possessed. Vicente, in turn, noticed this transformation and felt increasingly inspired to accompany her on each step of the way. The days began to have a lightness, and the mansion, previously lonely and full of shadows, now seemed to breathe along with them. Clara found a new passion in her volunteer work with community theater, something Vicente supported unconditionally. Every performance, every rehearsal, every smile exchanged with people in the community became a reminder that she was alive and could write her own story. Vicente always appeared at events, bringing flowers or words of encouragement, and this strengthened their relationship even further. He had found a new version of himself alongside her and, therefore, was determined to rebuild his life in a lighter and more meaningful way. One morning, while they were having coffee on the sunny balcony, Vicente, unexpectedly, made a proposal that surprised Clara. "I want to take you to a special place, a place that means a lot to me. I know our past together has been complicated, but I want to create new memories with you." Clara accepted with a smile, intrigued and, at the same time, excited by the idea of exploring a new phase alongside him. They then set off on a short trip to a picturesque village, a place filled with stunning scenery and tranquility. Arriving at the village, Vicente took her to a house that looked like something out of a fairy tale. The residence, with colorful flowers around it and a garden that stretched to the horizon, was where he had spent part of his childhood, before the tragedies that shaped his personality. "This is the place where I felt most at peace," he confessed, in an emotionally charged whisper. Clara accompanied him to the garden, and he started talking about his mother, the happy memories he had there and the dreams he had before the responsibilities weighed on his shoulders. Sitting on the garden bench, they talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams. For Vicente, it was as if that environment was healing his wounds, one by one, leaving him free to imagine a future without the shadow of the past. And alongside Clara, he found the courage to let those painful memories go, allowing new dreams to take their place. Clara, in turn, felt closer to him than ever before, and her heart was filled with a hope she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. At the end of the day, as the sun set over the horizon, Vicente took Clara's hand and looked into her eyes. "I'm not the most perfect man, Clara, but you make me want to be someone better. I want to build a life by your side, a life based on what really matters. I am ready to leave the past behind if you are willing to walk with me from now on." Clara didn't hesitate. She felt that Vicente was being truthful, and that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for them to be happy. Back at the mansion, Vicente began to make changes in his life. He hired help to manage his business, looking for a routine that didn't overwhelm him but allowed him to dedicate more time to the things he loved, and Clara. She, in turn, also began to dedicate time to new projects, and with each passing day, they both realized that they were building a home together, a true partnership. Their relationship, now based on respect, companionship, and genuine love, was unlike anything they had ever experienced. With the past finally closed, Vicente and Clara found, in each other, the promise of a future that, although uncertain, was full of hope and happiness. Months had passed since Vicente and Clara decided, together, to build a new life. The mansion, once cold and oppressive, was now a home filled with life, laughter, and moments of peace. Every room, every detail, reflected the love and respect they had for each other, and each day together felt like a celebration of the decisions they both made to overcome the past. The routine, far from being a repetition, was a constant opportunity to explore their dreams and ideas together, strengthening the relationship they had built with so much effort. Their relationship, while solid, continued to grow in depth and understanding. Clara felt like she had finally found someone who saw her in full, someone who knew her weaknesses and her strengths, and loved her for who she was. Vicente, in turn, rediscovered the joy of living with Clara every day, feeling grateful for the second chance that life had given him. They had been through challenges that would put any relationship to the test, but each obstacle they overcame made them even stronger. One day, as they walked through the mansion's garden, Vicente held Clara's hand firmly and, after a few seconds of silence, turned to her with a determined expression. "Clara, there's something I've been wanting to ask you for a while." She looked at him curiously, noticing the seriousness in his eyes, but not knowing what to expect. Vicente took a deep breath and said, "I would like this house to be officially ours, not just mine. I want to share everything with you. I want this home to be a symbol of what we built together. Would you agree to marry me?" Clara was speechless. Her heart was racing. The months they spent together taught her that Vicente was truly willing to build a future with her, but hearing those words out loud was more powerful than she could have imagined. She knew that this request was not just a formality, but a declaration of everything they had overcome, of all the promises they made and of each renewed hope. With tears in her eyes she replied, "Yes, Vicente. I want to build this life by your side, without reservations, without ghosts. I want this to be the beginning of our forever." The wedding was a simple, intimate celebration surrounded by only their closest friends and the people who truly mattered to them. The community theater organized a special performance to honor them, and Clara was moved to see how Vicente was involved in organizing every detail. He felt like a new person, a version of himself that only she knew and that she now shared with everyone around her. For Clara, marriage was not a happy ending, but a new beginning that promised even more adventures and discoveries. Married life brought new challenges, but they faced them together, as they always had. Each day was a conscious choice to be there for each other, to share joys and sorrows, to support each other in everything. Clara continued her work with theater and became involved in social causes, helping young people develop their artistic talents. Vicente, on the other hand, reduced his involvement in business, choosing to dedicate more time to what he really loved: writing and traveling alongside Clara. Years passed, and the story of Vicente and Clara became an inspiration for everyone around them. Those who knew Vicente's dark past were amazed at the transformation that Clara's love had brought to his life, and Clara herself had become a symbol of strength and determination, someone who not only saved herself, but also helped save a man lost in his own shadows. Together, they proved that love, when true, has the power to heal deep wounds and transform lives. In the end, Vicente and Clara became more than husband and wife. They became partners, confidants, and best friends. Each challenge they overcame together brought them closer together, and with each passing year, their love only seemed to grow. One peaceful night, sitting in the moonlit garden, Vicente held Clara's hand and said, "I never thought I could be so happy." She smiled, looking at him with the same tenderness and strength she had always carried. "Neither do I, Vicente. But I learned that life always surprises us, and that the best is yet to come." Together, they chose to live each day intensely, with their hearts open and their eyes focused on the future, building a story that, for them, would never have a true end. If you were moved by this story of overcoming and true love, leave a like and share. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on life. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapters and discover what else destiny has in store for our characters. Let's go on this journey of emotions together.